Thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you, Dr. Paul?
Very well, thank you.
Good.
Okay, we talked a lot about Korea yesterday, and lo and behold, a lot of other people did afterwards. A lot of conversation.
Ahead of the game.
It looks like it's a little bigger issue than average, even though at the moment is not gigantic. The markets had a response. They went down. They're down more today. Gold has gone up. That's significant. But both of those things are destined to have that happen anyway. Gold is destined to go up. The market's destined to go down. And sometimes these aren't the real reason. The real reason is the markets are distorted. But sometimes there's an incentive or an excuse. And so we see this. But the excuse hasn't been huge, but it's still there, and there's still a lot of worry. But the big conversation yesterday was the rhetoric of the president, that this was going to be devastating and he was going to make things the worst bombing ever and he was going to go after it. It was even a little bit strong for some of those pundits out there, and they got a little bit nervous. And the warmonger, including our friend John McCain, he said, hey, he's going too far. He should be talking about bombing Moscow, not being so loudmouth about this effort here, because it's not quite what he portrays it to be. But so it is big in the discussion. It's still very, very dangerous. And for some reason, what's happening now, I sort of think that they want this to happen. There's a benefit to it. People make money off it, and they want to keep people very much annoyed and scared about this, and that's what it looks like. But ulterior motives is, yes, let's have a hot Cold War, but not a hot war, and our profits will continue to roll. And of course, we read the famous book, War is a Racket, and no doubt even threat of war is a racket. I think that's what's going on, because we have to keep them in the weapons business, and it looks to me like that's exactly what's happening as part of it. But that doesn't rule out the great danger on both sides doing something stupid. It looks like both sides are capable of doing that, and that's how people miscalculate their enemies. This is one of the reasons why they end up in war. Un might be nuts, but he's not suicidal. He's not going to do anything. And America makes too much sense. They're not going to just up and bomb somebody. And I said there won't be any major war. But then the miscalculation and timing gets messed up. So the danger is still there. But I think the overriding incentive to keep this agitation going is that people make a lot of money off this.
That's true. And we'll talk a little bit about profits being up, but maybe it's an idea to step back and look at the timeline, because these things are really presented in isolation. Something comes out and it's flashed across the media. But if you think about what's happened over the past week or so, the sanctions were passed in the UN Security Council, unanimously, of course. That would affect, I think, a third of all North Korea's exports. It's going to decimate the economy. That if it happened to the U.S. and a third of our exports were shut down, we would consider it an act of war. So that's what happened. And then after that, there was another North Korea test, which was a response to the sanctions. And then after that, which is what happened yesterday, which got everything really in high gear, was an article by Joby Warwick in the Washington Post. Now, hopefully our viewers will remember the name Joby Warwick, because he's been involved in promoting war for the Washington Post for a long time. He was behind the Iran is building nuclear weapons. He was behind the Iraq is building nuclear weapons. He's one of the guys who does this for a living. He put out a piece in the Washington Post saying North Korea is able to miniaturize its nukes and put them on these missiles. You look through the article, what's the sourcing? No sourcing. All anonymous sourcing from intelligence agencies. Breaking the rules of journalism 101. That got everything into high gear. That's when Trump went nuts and said he promised fire and fury on North Korea, the likes of which the world has never seen. And then after that, he sent some bombers up toward the Korean peninsula, to the Korean coast. The Japanese were involved, and then the North Koreans made a threat. Hey, we're gonna take care of. We're gonna nuke Guam after this. So if you look at it in the whole context, then I think it has a different flavor.
Yeah, and it gets ratcheted up. And one thing that I was watching closely was the specific weapon, the THAAD anti-ballistic missiles, because that's where there's made a lot of money, and Lockheed is very much in lockstep with all of this. And of course, I shouldn't say anything about Lockheed and THAAD because their home base is in El Paso, Texas. You know, and but they have things all around. But they have promoted this, and this is part of the problem. They want to sell these things, and my estimation is the development is always so long, it's hard to track it. But there's some who estimate that we've already spent $40 billion on developing this, and now we are saying we will put them in South Korea, and we will charge them $1.5 billion. And you know, the South Koreans aren't even anxious for it. They know they become more vulnerable. So we're antagonizing, behind the scenes at least, the people in South Korea. But what about China? Even if the administration wants to antagonize China, it doesn't make good sense, you know. And and they're unhappy because these anti-ballistic missiles can be converted. If we put these right on the DMZ, we can also spy on the Chinese. So it's a threat to China as well. So these missiles are, I think, a big deal, and there's a lot of money being made. And you know, when you go and look at all this and read all the articles, there's still an argument that they're far from a perfect weapon. You know, they've been testing. They say 11 times out of 11 it was perfect, but it was all choreographed. You know, everybody knew what was going on, and the evidence right now is that probably they can go after one missile at a time. And if you're talking about stopping missiles going 50 or 80 miles, you know, from North Korea into Seoul, which are going to be conventional missiles, this isn't doing anything. But the big thing is sell these weapons. Oh, yeah. And guess what? Lockheed stock, who makes the missiles, their stock went up yesterday. And if you look at it in the last couple years, Lockheed, you know, 5 years ago was $100. Now it's over $300. So they're doing well with this, and it looks like the fear of war and the fear mongering and the warmongering is good for war profiteers, and they're doing well, and the American people are made vulnerable. A lot of people have been convinced by this war propaganda, and in spite of the fact of all the lies about Iraq, there's still a lot of Americans say, well, this is different. This is different. We have to go after this madman because he can reach LA and Chicago and New York City with a nuke. And it just isn't true.
Well, you know, I laugh a little bit because, you know, Lockheed Martin did our computer systems when we were in your office on the Hill. And if they do their missiles anything like they did our computer systems, I'm quite worried about their ability to protect us. But, you know, right, the profits are way up. Just since July 4th, 20% profits are up. So there's a lot of mansions being built in the Beltway. The U.S. government accounts for 70% of their revenue. Lockheed Martin. So essentially it is a government industry, but they privatize the profits, socialize the losses.
Yeah, and a super promoter of this weapon system is Mac Thornberry. He's the chairman of the Armed Service Committee in the House. He happens to be from Texas, and we do a lot of other weapon system in Texas. So it's political. Texas isn't the only state that benefits. Usually all the states benefit from war profiteering because that's how they can get all the delegations to go along with it. And it is the war mongering that goes on. And I want to call reference, and you probably have seen this on what Brian Williams had to say. You know, we have the actual policies that are very dangerous, but then you have the marching orders for the establishment, and evidently they talk with each other or get the same information because whether it's a conservative TV station or liberal, they're all for this war, you know, go on. But here's a headline. It appeared on Zero Hedge just a short while ago. NBC's Brian Williams, quote, "Our job is to scare people to death over North Korea." Do you think that could be a Freudian slip, or what's going on there?
Well, it's great for profits, you know. And, you know, I wonder, I think about, you know, the psychological impact of the bombastic rhetoric, the breathless articles that come out from people with a long track record of promoting war, and what it does to people. You get to the brink of a major war, and then it pulls back. Like today, Tillerson pulling back a little bit. And then maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, or maybe in 3 hours, it escalates. They're at it again. They're at it again. And I think it has a psychological impact on people. There's less resistance to actually going in. Look, we've had enough of this toying around. It's time to go and take care of it. And I looked at something that Donald Trump said in 1999, and he was condemning all the bluster and warmongering over North Korea. And he said, I would negotiate the heck out of it with these people if I were in power. Yeah. 1999. So 18 years we've been terrified. He had the right idea then, but now all of a sudden it's something we have to face.
Yeah, but this thing's been going on since 1945, 1950, really. That's 60-some years, and there's more chaos than ever. But you know, this bluster and this bickering going back and forth, they say that Un is the one that's threatening. All he says is, if you mess with us, we're going to defend ourselves, and we're going to use all these weapons. But you know, what a difference between what happens in the Middle East. You have to think about this at least, because Israel, they don't brag about their nuclear weapons. You're not even supposed to know about them. Yeah. They have a lot of nuclear weapons, you know, and they can defend themselves. So they don't have to they don't have to come along with all this bluster and say to, you know, any of those countries around there and say, don't touch us. They know that most of the Arab countries know they're not going to touch Israel. And most people know that Israel has the weapons. And most of the time there's no bluster, but subtly, you know, there's a mess over there, but there's not this. The armies, the Arab Muslim armies aren't marching against the Israeli armies, because that has been sort of settled, and you don't even hear this rhetoric. And you compare that to all this bluster and talk with this country that is not capable of lasting more than 3 hours. You know, if there's a hot war break out, we have the ability to silence them completely and totally, of course, killing millions of people unnecessarily, but it would be silenced in 3 hours, you know. But still the bluster goes. That's why ulterior motives are important, and that's why I am convinced, and I'll bet you most of our viewers would agree, that there's a lot of profiteering in the war machine.
And you were mentioning before we came on, we were talking about one fellow who you say is essentially, he's the salesman for these THAAD missiles. He was a public servant for decades, right? We're talking about Bill Cohen.
Yeah, Bill Cohen, and I knew Bill. He was in the House. I believe we overlapped, then he went into the Senate. And good diplomat and conversationalist. You know, he's not going to rant and rave and shout at you. He has a little different personality than John McCain. But nevertheless, if you look at his policy, you know, he was very, very much involved in weapon system as the Secretary of Defense. And he has now, I guess it's been probably 15 years or so since he's been out of office. I think he was in the Clinton administration, but he has a thing called the Cohen Group. It's the leading group of lobbyists for weapons system, and people like Lockheed Martin. So he has done quite well. And it just happened that this morning I heard him on an interview, which called my attention to this, because he sounded like a salesman. And he wanted to talk about THAAD, you know, the anti-ballistic missiles. And then all you have to do is Google that and look back, and his name comes up quite frequently for especially the last couple of years, because this has been only made at the THAAD anti-missiles have only come on stream where they think they could use them. But of course, like many weapon systems, just think about the F-35, how often they had it ready to go, ready and raring to go. But it would be terrible if we had to depend totally on the F-35. And so there's a lot of reservations about what the THAAD anti-ballistic missile system would do. But believe me, Bill Cohen would explain to you why it's a super defense system.
And the thing is, you're right, he's not a fire breather. He is probably not a nasty guy at all in person, but he's made fortune pushing fear. And the last thing he would want would be for the conventional wisdom to be, this is under control. There are talks going on between North and South Korea. This is ratcheting down. Maybe even we've accepted the proposal that the Russians and Chinese made, that North Korea has agreed to many times, which is that they would stop their testing if the U.S. and South Korea would ratchet down its military exercises in their backyard. That sounds like a reasonable deal. The Cohens of the world would not want that to happen. It's bad for business.
Yeah, but one thing that they have convinced, and I don't say this lightly because there's some evidence that Un is a unstable person, but if you look at it with all honesty and objectivity, I think it's hard to prove that because he's one that's stirring up a lot of problems. But that doesn't mean that he hasn't told us the truth, you know. And I just don't think it's in his interest. I don't think he's suicidal. He's not going to attack South Korea. Just remember the attack, the Korean War in 1950 was the North Communists invaded the South, which was defended by the United States. And of course, why I look so askance on this whole thing is one of the earliest, most significant events for the United Nations was 1950, where they quickly passed a resolution and they quickly had us, or it was only days that Truman had sent the troops over there, but he never went to Congress and said we should have a declaration of war. But that was the big event. You know, the Organization Designed for Peace created and supported this war, and it's been going on ever since. And so I would say that people should question the authenticity of the United Nations as a peacekeeping organization, because there's been a lot of fighting going on since that time.
You know, I'm not a psychiatrist or psychologist, but I think there's a very important psychological impact, and you see it every single time the war machine rears its head. You've got to call the enemy psychologically unstable, mentally unfit. They did it for Saddam, they did it for Gaddafi, they highlighted their eccentricities. And I think the reason they do that is you want to head off any move for negotiations. No, they're crazy, you can't talk to them. And if you can establish that in the minds of Americans, then they realize negotiations are pointless, we got to go straight to war. So he may well be as nutty as some people say, but I'm going to hesitate because I know this is a tool that's used to promote war.
And you know, along with that, the leader they go after and stir up the emotions, but they also have to demonize his soldiers, the people, and they do that as well. So you have to really hate to go and kill, because I don't believe we have a natural tendency that most young people want to grab rifles, go 6,000 miles away and start shooting people they don't know. So they have to know there's a vicious enemy out there. They have to be demonized, and the leader has to be Hitler, and then you can motivate them, and the truth is just beyond it. This is the way there's some reaction now toward our position that how can you say anything reasonable about this situation? Because look, this guy's a madman, and he's going to bomb the United States. But that's exactly the same rhetoric we heard in 1973, and we're still in that country fighting war. So there's a lot of room for you know, a little bit of common sense. How do you summarize this, Daniel, on what's going on here?
Well, my parting point is probably a little depressing, but you know, the whole war on terror is based on a war against violent religious extremism. That's the basis of it. Well, here's Pastor Robert Jeffress. He was one of Trump's evangelical advisors. He spoke at the inauguration of President Trump. Here's what he said yesterday. In the case of North Korea, God has given Trump authority to take out Kim Jong-Un. If that's not violent religious extremism, I don't know what is.
Yeah, religion also gets entered into the factor almost always. And then if there's a radical element of any major religion, whether it's Christianity, Judaism, or Islam, it gets painted with the broad brush, so everybody believes that. But I don't think Judaism or Christianity should be painted by some violent passages of the Old Testament. But they do use this, and religion is a powerful tool, so if you get the emotions over it, it was very frustrating to me during the campaign and fighting against going to war in Iraq, was that Christian evangelicals were not in my camp. They were very, very annoyed. Matter of fact, I could be disinvited to an event because I had these positions on foreign policy, and I shouldn't be invited. So that is the use of of religion in a very sinister and evil way, and just to distort and gather the emotional support from the people. And that's what has to come eventually, because the natural tendency is not to go to war. You know, even in the first Persian Gulf War and the Iraq War, it wasn't like one day or two. It usually takes quite a few months, and I remember it took a good while to build up the animosity to go against Iraq, because it was removed a bit from 9/11. Going into Afghanistan, the emotions were very, very high, and the people responded rather quickly. Something had to be done. So, but it takes time. The people just get snookered into it, and they end up believing this stuff, and then it becomes their patriotic duty to be loyal to the war effort, and they actually get worse when the war breaks out, because then you can't even suggest there might have been a mistake by our own government. It takes a long time after the war, whichever war it is, breaks out, before it'll be even permissible to think something, well, maybe we made a mistake. But I believe in true patriotism. I think true patriotism should bring out our ability and willingness to challenge our own government when we know darn well they're wrong. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. And please come back to the Liberty Report soon.